And so welcome everybody. Good morning. My name is Lena Kanzler. I'm TRI's Education and Training Manager. This is our November consultation as part of our series of monthly consultations. And the topic today is CRM's use with military veterans, law enforcement, and first responders. We have several panelists here to speak with you today about the topic. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. The webinar is being recorded for future use. We ask that you mute your microphone if you're not speaking. There is a chat feature that we invite you to use down at the bottom. We'll periodically pause so that we can input any feedback or questions from the chat. The recording and any follow-up information that we talk about during the meeting will be sent within the week following this meeting. And then if you have any questions or feedback or anything that we're unable to cover during the meeting, please feel free to submit that to me. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Elaine.
Hello, welcome. We are we're really excited that we have this group of panelists. And I want to start out with, first of all, is, as we know, yesterday was Veterans Day. And so we always want to extend our compassion and our gratitude to those who have served. And there's also people that serve every single day. We've had the good fortune to share our model, and it is being implemented by people who are also of service, who are in law enforcement and who are first responders. So we have some of those folks on the line today, and they'll share a little bit about what they're doing in their communities to create greater healing. But I want to just do a shout out to Jan Click and Mark Dust a little bit to begin with, because when we were first starting the Trauma Resource Institute, I really didn't know much about working with the military. And Mark Dust one day over lunch told me what words I shouldn't say, like you don't call a Marine a soldier. So he helped me learn some of the vernacular that I hope that I could be more sensitive. So Mark, I always thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Yes, and then Jan Click, and many of you may know that in our book, Building Resilience to Trauma, is Jan and I wrote that chapter, and Jan certainly informed me for her many years of working with the VA. And then, oh my gosh, Bill Cross, what can I say, my dear friend, you have informed me in more ways than one about not only being a veteran, but just being a decent human being. So I just always, my heart goes out to you. And then there's Jen Wallace. Oh my gosh, this woman who has, this passion to bring the healing to people, in not only in law enforcement, but into integrating the work that we're doing in forensic exams regarding sexual assault. I'm going to let them speak, but I just want to, and I know Jen Householder will be coming on soon, and I'll say something about Jen when she comes back on. So in any event, with that, I'm going to turn this over and have each of our panelists maybe say a little bit more. Then they're going to each have a segment, and please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and Alina will direct the appropriate questions at the right time. So Bill, take it, it's to you now.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. I'm really happy to be here with everybody, and just as a background, I'm a Vietnam veteran and started getting interested in TRIM and CRM initially in the somatic experiencing training that I was in, and a very lovely woman introduced me and said, you got to talk with this Elaine. She's the one that's got the information that could be really helpful for veterans. So Elaine and I got together in Amherst in, I think it was 2011. And yeah, soon, I took the training and invited Elaine to come to Syracuse, where I was going to say stationed. I'm still back. I had been working with veterans from the police department who were returning from Iraq at the time, and were going back into police work. And so I was working with them to help the transition from the military back into the police. And Elaine agreed to come in and do a CRM training with me with the peer support team of the Syracuse Police Department. And that really was the first CRM training we did in Syracuse. And since that time, we have continued to do CRM training, not only with the police, the peer support team, but Ron Fish and I have conducted trim intros to all the roll calls of the police department. So we continue to do that with the Syracuse Police, with the Onondaga Sheriffs, and with the Vet Center or the Veterans Administration. And well, I think that's enough at this point as an intro. So,
well, and can I just say one thing to add to what you're saying too? Because I think when we first went in there, there had been some challenges with one of the veterans who was hired by the force. And the person in charge wanted to do it better, realizing that a lot of the people that were coming back that were being hired may have some post-traumatic stress injury, and how could we help? So it really came from a very deep healing place, and I just wanted to add that to your introduction, Bill. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Elaine.
All right. So Jan, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, welcome. I'm glad to be here today. So I worked at the VA for 32 years. I retired in 2012, and it was an honor and has been an honor and privilege to work with veterans and their families. We brought the community resiliency model into the VA and actually piloted the community resiliency model group curriculum. We were writing it as we went along, weren't we, Elaine?
Quite a ride it was.
Yes. And ended up with running these groups for 8 weeks at a time. And so we were able to bring the community resiliency model to a number of veterans as I brought this forward. And there were a number of vets that didn't want to stop after the 8 weeks. And so I started an alumni group, which continued until I retired. And then realizing that there wasn't going to be anyone to continue that on, I offered to have them come to my office pro bono once a month. And I'm delighted to say that 7 years later, those veterans are still coming to my office once a month. And it's really been exciting to hear how they've continued to use the skills over the years. So I was also involved with the Veterans Extension Project in San Bernardino, where we brought the community resiliency model. Again, that's where the model was really birthed in a lot of ways, and we're able to bring that model into work with veterans. It was just so inspiring to see them be able to teach this and hear stories of how they used it with their family members and friends and brought it into their church communities. So I'm delighted to be here today. I'm happy to answer any questions. But it's just been a pleasure to be able to bring these tools to help so many people.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you so much. And then Mark, do you want to go next?
Sure. All right. Good morning, all. My name is Dr. Mark Dust. I'm a lecturer at California State University, Fullerton, and I've been using CRM since before it was CRM. About 2009 or so was when I first started working with Elaine and Tri, and I've got a long history with the organization. I also was part of the Veterans Extension Project, and as Elaine mentioned earlier, helped with adapting some of the language that we were using in CRM to the veteran active duty population kind of thing. That's it for now, and I'm sure I'll get into more details a little bit later on.
Well, can I add a little bit? I love that you said Dr. Mark Dust. Because when I knew you, you didn't have your doctorate, but you also did your dissertation on the community resiliency model. So I just have to add that piece.
That I did.
Yes, and it was very exciting to go when he defended his dissertation, I have to say. But also, I think this is part of CRM, and I want to add a piece. We had a mutual friend, and the friend said, oh, you need to meet Mark Dust and share your skills with him. So Mark and I met at a soup plantation, and over lunch, I taught him the skills, and that was the beginning. And I think that's what's so inherent in the community resiliency model. It doesn't have to be fancy, and it can be shared with people even over a meal. And who knew that you were going to be involved with us for so long? So anyway, I just remembered that moment, Mark, in that soup plantation many moons ago now. Gosh, 10 years ago. Yes.
Yeah, that's a nice resource for me because if it wasn't for that meeting, I would never have got my PhD.
Oh, I don't know if that's true.
No, it's very true, because if I hadn't learned these skills, I don't think anything that I'm doing now would have ever materialized, and when I say that CRM saved my life, I believe it did.
Well, you'll have to share maybe more about that after Jen introduces herself.
Will do.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Thanks so much. All right, Jen Wallace.
Good morning from soggy Seattle.
Yeah, mover and shaker up there in Washington State.
Yeah. Well, I have a team supporting me. I actually see one on video. One Curtis. So I have a background as a federal law enforcement officer, criminal investigator with the Defense Department. And I retired from that in June of 2015, and then started doing some work with the Seattle Police Department as a volunteer, working with domestic violence victims, and then moved on into a grant in a civilian role as a program advisor on a human trafficking grant that was trauma-informed and victim-centered. And in that role, I sought out training for law enforcement and really couldn't find a lot of resources out there until I encountered the Trauma Resource Institute. And it just so happened that there was a training in my hometown, original hometown of Syracuse. And I was very interested in going to the training there because of their work with the police department in particular. And I was just excited about a model that offered some skills, because some of the models I looked at, there was a lot of information, but they didn't really weren't offering skills like this particular model. So actually the first course I took was in Syracuse, and it was TRIM with Bill and Ron. And I was very impacted by that training, to the extent that when I then left and started to bring it into the human trafficking arena, but had encountered just so many obstacles with that. And as I was changing jobs, recognized that these skills would be very useful and to my current position, which is a program manager of sexual assault investigations at the State Law Enforcement Training Academy. And so I held this. I knew that there was a place for these skills, and when I got this position, it was pretty obvious that with this emphasis on victim interviewing, that this could provide an opportunity to integrate wellness skills with investigators who are conducting those interviews. So that's what we've been doing. We have I'll probably speak to this more during our call, but we currently have 6 provisionally trained or certified CRM trainers as part of the program, and 3 of us who have been certified. So we're excited to really get to continue to incorporate this. We've been doing it in our 8 trainings thus far, and just plan to expand that both within the sexual assault investigation training as well as work in our respective communities.
And I would just can I just add one thing before you give your longer, I think was really struck me when I first started meeting with Jen was the desire to not re-traumatize victims. it was already hard enough to have been sexually assaulted. But because law enforcement has to ask those really difficult questions to, which is called a forensic examination, how could they do it so that they could get the right information and at the same time try to be as gentle as they could with the victim survivors. So I just want to do a shout out to you for that, Jen, because I think one of the things that we've been learning is that there are some folks that don't understand that law enforcement are involved in that kind of work. We sometimes see law enforcement just on kind of the latest horrible thing that's happened on the news and not seeing the other side. And I really, all 9 of you have, I think, changed all of us in terms of the degree of your compassion and commitment to helping your community. So I just wanted to do a shout out to you for that before we turn over to the rest of the panel. Okay, thank you, Jen. All right, so now I just want to, whoever wants to start first, I would invite you to share what you feel is important to share. What would you like, knowing that we only have a short period of time and people may be hearing your voice for a few minutes, that you think is the most important thing that you've learned about integrating the community resiliency model into your community? So with that, whoever wants to go first, or for yourself, whoever would like to go first. Maybe Bill, if you want to go first, and talk a little bit about how you have been working in your community and giving us more detail.
Okay, you mentioned what I'd like to emphasize, and what we found is that there's a tremendous response that people are having to the visceral release that they can experience using these skills. And it can be something in an initial training that's very powerful and can in a way hook people into using these skills. And what I've found really key is to help people use these in an ongoing way. One of the things that I've done in talking with vets and with first responders is that when we're trained, whether it's as a vet or as a police, you're trained to do the job, get the job done, but you're not trained to take care of yourself. That's secondary. And yet, as some of my earliest training was, you need to learn to, as a West Point cadet at 17, I was told, you got to take the hill and you got to bring up hot chow, all right? And so to get in the hill, taking the hill was the task, but bringing up hot chow involved taking care of your people. And that includes taking care of yourself. So helping the first responders, helping vets recognize that they've got to integrate these skills in the same way that they integrate, say, target practice. And I talk about it and say, all right, look, every quarter or twice a year, you've got to go out and requalify for your weapon. You got to do the same thing with these skills. You have to have this as an ongoing process and get recertified, essentially, and have that be something which is on your to-do list throughout, and keep going, not just quarterly, but daily, really. And that's the emphasis that I've really been using to help.
Yeah, I think you're right, Bill. I think the more that we're learning about the model as the research is coming out, is that really you're talking about dosage effect, right? The more you take in this good stuff, really the more resilient you become. And
Absolutely.
I think that many people who do community resiliency model teachings now also do, like some people call them booster sessions, where they can drop in, community members can drop in to further enhance their skills.
Absolutely.
And of course, we have the iChill app that I think is also something that's helpful. And I know that really came out of a group that Jan was doing, where there was, and Jan can maybe even talk about it, of how iChill came to be. Thank you so much, Bill. And if there's something else you want to add as we go along, please do.
Okay.
So maybe I'll turn it over to Jan now. Jan.
Hi. So I was thinking as you were talking, I wanted to speak to the iChill app, but the inspiration of that app came from a woman that was in my group. I was doing the community resiliency model classes in the women's clinic at the VA where I worked. And at one point she said to me, well, you know, my friend can track her blood sugars on her phone. How come there isn't a way for us to track our resources? And so from a conversation that I had with Elaine after that, we were able to get funding from Gary Trudeau, who actually paid to build the platform for this iChill app. So it's really exciting to me that the inspiration of that was a female veteran that I worked with. I just wanted to say that I think over the years, having taught this, you know, model to so many veterans, what I heard over and over was the piece about taking the shame away, you know, that when you're focusing on your nervous system being dysregulated, that's a very different paradigm than the pathology paradigm. You know, I love Elaine's slide of, you know, the what's wrong with you to the trauma-informed what's happened to you, and the resiliency informed of what's right with you. And I remember working with a special ops vet at one point, and I hadn't even taught him the skills, but just explaining the resilient zone and the high and the low, and the impact of trauma on mind and body. He looked at me and he said, "Do you mean that I'm not crazy?" You know, and just having that paradigm shift of knowing that it was about his nervous system being dysregulated, I think was just so powerful, a shift for him. And the other piece that I saw over and over was veterans being able to use these skills in a very practical way. I remember one veteran that was in one of my groups coming back after learning grounding and saying, you know, my wife and I used to have all these arguments when we talked about money. And so I taught her the grounding skill, and now we do a grounding exercise together before we talk about money. We don't fight anymore. And I just thought, how cool is that that was changed a fundamental part of their relationship that had not been working very well. So I think those are important points I wanted to make.
Thank you, Jan. Why don't we have Mark go next?
All right. I think one of the most powerful things about CRM for me was it helped me to understand it's not me, it's my biology. That's, you know, one of the things that I bring up in my trainings is that was very, very powerful. And it changed that paradigm like Jan was talking about. It allowed me to shift the emphasis away from I'm messed up to now it's my biology that's messed up. I can do something about that. All right. And then the skills, I think the most powerful part as far as the skills goes is it doesn't require a mental health professional in order to be able to administer them. All right. We don't have enough mental health professionals. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a social worker. I'm an academic nowadays. And so I think that's one of the most powerful things is that it doesn't require somebody with a license to teach you the skills. You don't have to have a license to use the skills yourself. There is, you know, Elaine mentioned she taught them to me basically over lunch, over a bowl of soup kind of thing. And it's something that can be done relatively quickly. It's not a long training period, but it is a skill. And like any skill, you got to practice it. All right. And so I always prescribe, you know, the skills to be done on yourself first, kind of like when you're in a airplane, they always tell you to put on your oxygen mask first before you put one on anybody you're flying with, kind of thing. So learn the skills that take care of yourself. And then by taking care of myself, I was then able to do a better job of helping others take care of themselves. And so that's the two takeaways for me with the CRM skills was it's something I can do on my own. and it gives me power over my biology, and shifting the blame away from me being messed up to it's my biology and I can do something about that.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much. All right, Jen, let people know what you're carving out there in Washington State. I mean, it might be helpful to know about the legislation too, about that kind of legislation. Who knows, maybe some other states will do something similar.
Yeah, our state has mandated that any officer who is regularly conducting adult sexual assault investigations go through this training that emphasizes victim interviewing, a trauma-informed, victim-centered approach to interviewing. And so part of that is that we're training the neurobiology of trauma and just offering officers both the information and skills to navigate those very sensitive, intensive interviews. And I think that there's so much, we're packing a lot of information into 3 days, a 3-day training. One of those days, the officers are interviewing actors who are portraying sexual assault victims. So we teach these skills at the outset. We're weaving these skills into the trainings, and they have an opportunity, and we have facilitators, many of them who've been trained in the community resiliency model, to bring those wellness skills into those interviewing practices. And although I think we're met with skepticism to some degree initially, as the officers start to experiment with those practices, they're finding them useful. And so we often get responses, towards the end of the class, and sometimes following the class by new interview facilitators who join us about the effectiveness of just using those skills for themselves. And I mean, frankly, a lot of officers, a lot of people are already applying some of these skills, but giving them a name and having some reinforcement, I think, has been really helpful. I mean, in law enforcement, what we often emphasize is, having situational awareness, but bringing some self-awareness and some self-regulation through these skills is also extremely useful, particularly now that fortunately now we're in a moment of time where there is more attention on officer wellness and resiliency. And so I think these skills in this program really fits so well with that. And we know what we're doing in the training is bringing some of the officers have some experience with trauma-informed already, but then moving them into a resiliency-informed mindset as well. So it just seemed, and I know that we continue to get practice, and we as we're using the skills and finding new ways to bring them into the training with each class, which is pretty exciting.
I mean, I also, if you could describe also, because I noticed that the people who you've been bringing up to get trained, some of them are law enforcement officers, Some of them are advocates, and we just this last training had a prosecuting attorney. Could you tell us a little bit about having a team of people from different disciplines? Yeah, so one of our investigative approach, one of the things we're emphasizing in the training is collaborating, because there's so many pieces to an investigation and components of the criminal justice system. And so that we're also often working with prosecutors and advocates and nurse examiners. And so they're all part of our training team. And so we felt it was important to also for them to have some background in the crim skills as well, since they're a part of this team. And they can also educate their respective communities. So it's not, because we're not isolated as law enforcement officers. We're not conducting these investigations single-handedly, that we're relying on our resources in the community to assist with these investigations. And in the overall well-being of, to be victim-centered, is to include these various team members. So that's why we've sent people from different disciplines to the training as well.
and are also doing some informal trainings of the advocates working with us, as well as the actors and some of the other folks.
So I understand from an email I recently got from you that you are also extending it out to, was it the parole people? Who was the group that you just recently trained? In the
Olivia and I recently trained, it was actually the city attorney's office.
The city attorney's office, okay.
Yeah, domestic violence advocates. And they invited some advocates from the Seattle Police Department to join in that training as well. And as you know, Heidi from the prosecutor's office is planning to bring that to prosecutors.
Yes. And so how was it received? Just as curiosity, as you know, here you're now our CRM teachers, you got your 3 certified and 6 on the way. So how are attorneys receiving this?
I think that that's still a little new for us. So it's been some of the attorneys we're working with, they're interested in it, but they haven't received any of our informal training sessions. It's just a matter of time and capacity. But I think by having a prosecutor among our CRM trainers, I think we'll start expanding more into that area as well. And I did want to let you know, part of the reason this started getting traction in the advocate community was Jessica Klein, who has worked closely with TRI over the years. And I provided some training to the Washington Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, their advocates and support staff last year. And because of the benefits they saw from that training, we're starting to get more interest in that field from various places around the state.
So it's really spreading.
Yeah, it's spreading.
The few of you, it's just spreading. So I think what I love about what everyone's been talking about from different communities is that once you start spreading the sprinkle of the community resiliency model, and people start sensing the skills, like what Bill and Mark said too about the self-care piece, it doesn't go away. That's something that if you like the skills and you continue to use it, then it becomes stronger. And I also, even though this was, you're talking about you have nurses also as part of your team, I got an email from Lindy Grabby yesterday from Emory University. Many of you have heard me talk about Lindy because she has just gotten the first randomized controlled trial published in one of the leading nurses journals in the country. So Nurses Outlook has accepted her randomized controlled trial with the 3-hour dosage of community resiliency model teaching that showed after a year an 80% increase in well-being. And the nurses had very high levels of burnout, and about a third of them had symptoms of post-traumatic stress injury. So I would imagine in all the fields that we're working in, whether we're working with veterans, law enforcement, first responders, and all the different ways that people who are listening work with people, that this is really exciting. So when that actually gets published, when we actually have it in hand, believe me, we're going to disseminate it to all of you, as we're so excited that it has been published. So yay. And I just want to say also about Jessica Klein. Jessica Klein, we first trained when she was a social worker with and an advocate at the UCLA Rape Crisis Center. And she was one of the first ones that would come back to me because, Elaine, it's kind of conversationally doing CRM when she was in the emergency room with people, and she saw that people were calmer and they were able to get their story out in a different way that was from being calmer rather than being out of their zone, and actually that they could remember more detail. And so I think, when we talk about wanting to bring people to justice who've done horrible things, that, and also, as one of the goals, but the other goal is not to re-traumatize, if we can possibly help it, people who have to tell that story over and over again. So I think that's what everyone is doing here on the call, is that's been a really big part about what we've been trying to do, which ultimately is healing, which is exciting. And I also have to say, because I want to shout out to Heidi Strange, who was at the prosecutor. She did the most amazing student teaching. And so I imagine she's going to be rocking. She's going to be rocking a lot of attorneys there in Washington State, because she comes from such a place of kindness and compassion. And just has a very strong advocacy kind of way about her. So you have to let her know that I called her out. Well, or just send her the
listening.
Maybe she's listening. So if you're listening, Heidi, I want you to know that. So, okay. So how are we doing with time? This has been, okay, we still have time. So, all right. So anyone, any of our panelists, Bill or Mark or Jen, anything more you want to say right now? Really want to help our listeners really understand more about working with veterans and law enforcement.
I've just been thinking about the spreading the word on this. In our community, there's this long-standing group called the Onondaga Community Trauma Task Force, which involves people from all different agencies: Salvation Army, Rescue Mission, the VA, police, fire, EMTs. And we got we applied for a grant last year and put on a CRM Train the Trainers. I know there's a new name for that.
Teacher training.
Teacher training, where we trained a number of different people, 2 from many different organizations and 2 from the police department, who then have continued to do the CRM training within their agency. But in addition, the word is out within this larger community trauma task force, such that we've been presenting, we made a presentation to a group called the Interfaith Works, which was addressing the trauma potentially within houses of worship. And we made a presentation to them last month about what to do within your community to be able to maintain your own sense of peace in the situations where now it's traumatic, potentially, at the synagogue or the mosque or the churches. So that community has spread out, and we're having more CRM trainings scheduled for next year throughout the entire Syracuse area, and it's really spread to the schools, to, as I say, churches, and as well certainly the police and the fire. And through this work, it's also now we are there are 2 different county agencies from other counties who now want some training from us. So
great.
It's just
it spread.
It spreads. So
it does. You know, I just did somebody asked me how many states and how many countries have you brought, the either CRM or TRIM to? And so, and this is not just TRI, this is a wider community. And it's 39 countries and 23 states so far. So we still have some work to do, but we'll get there. So I was really excited, either through, TRI or through Loma Linda or through people like each one of you on the call who may go to a different country. And of course, we now have our association with the social, emotional, and ethical learning program from Emory. And their chapter 2 are certainly bringing the skills to many places on the globe. So it's pretty exciting what's happened, and way back when Jan and Mark and I were doing some of the beginning CRM teachings to even see if it had value. So it's quite humbling to see what people are doing. The other thing I want to say about we've had a number of people from Native communities from around the country take the CRM teaching. But we have an intern right now from the Claremont Graduate University. Her name is Alexis Manzano, and Alexis is the North American young person, Native person. I don't know how they voted this, but she's the representative to the United Nations. And so she is our intern this year. So we're hoping to do some further work in reaching out to Native communities to see how we can be more effective if they would think that the model would be helpful for their tribe. So that's something that's in the works. When I hear, what you've done up in Syracuse, it's of course here we first met, Bill, because of the interest in veterans. And
Right.
oftentimes that happens. Someone will come because they have an interest in something, and then it ends up going into like the faith-based communities. And we've really seen that around the world, where we've come in for a particular reason, and then the utility of the skills has been seen to be able to be applied to so many different arenas. So, and also, I really want you all to think about too, when you know people in different communities, is how you link people together. I was recently in Dayton, Ohio, and was invited by a number of therapists there to do a CRM teaching for them. And they invited the police chief, Richard Beal of Dayton. And so I was able to put him in touch with Jen. So I don't know if anything will come up about it, but I know that he put in his bulletin for his department the next month, he put in a whole thing about mindfulness, because like Bill and Jen, they're mindfulness teacher. He's a mindfulness teacher, but he also did a really nice thing about CRM. And he put a link to Jen Householder's video that's on our website. So I think that's how we, again, expand it out, because we are seeing a lot of tragic things in our community, sadly. And, how do we respond? And one of the things that I talked about with Rick and with the therapists that were there, he said, sometimes after these events happen, we know there's a lot of people that want to help. And the therapists are all going, we want to help, we want to help. But if the police department doesn't know the therapist, they're not going to know to trust them, to give them a call and say, we need you down, at the whatever that place may be, because we have a lot of people hurting right now. So I really want everyone on the call to think about, if you haven't reached out to coalitions that include first responders and local law enforcement, then and advocates and all the different things that we do, I don't think will be as effective in helping get the community resiliency model into communities preventively, so that if something like that happens, that we have boots on the ground helping people to get back into their zone quicker. Because if what we see is true, that people who have dysregulated nervous systems, which any of us would go into the high zone if there's one of those horrible events that happen, but it's the people that don't get back into good heart rate variability who end up having a greater chance of developing post-traumatic stress injury. So if we can help them on the ground, and that's going to be a very big thing. And that doesn't, when I hear what, Bill has done and what Jen has done in terms of helping law enforcement to understand this, because they are often the first responders. And, all of us, I think once we learn these skills, we slip them in terms of our, conversational resourcing. We used to call it stealth resourcing. Now we call it conversational, where we might just even say, we're here to help right now. And that sometimes causes that person to take that deep breath. So in any event, let's help, our communities kind of expand those ideas.
Elaine, can I add to that?
Yes, please, Mark, go ahead.
That's a great segue into my dissertation research. Because what I found in my dissertation research was that resourcing just 15 minutes a day for the course of a week can lower the sympathetic arousal in participants when they're watching traumatic or stressful videos. And so what it looks like is, we talk about the resilient zone and we have, the peaks and the troughs. It looks like we can kind of squish that a little bit to where they're not quite as reactive as they were before. And so that's one way we might possibly be able to prevent the development of PTSD, is by lowering the sympathetic arousal. The second way that Elaine alluded to just a second ago was that if we can return to baseline faster, our heart rate variability comes back down to our baseline faster after the traumatic event, it's much less likely to develop into PTSD as well. And so in my research also showed that the CRM group returned to baseline faster than the mindfulness group or the control group. And so there's some hope there that there's a possibility that this preventive stuff, we can use CRM as a way to strengthen our nervous systems before a traumatic event happens. And then if one does happen, we can return back to baseline faster so that it doesn't develop into this stuck hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal gland. The HPA axis doesn't get stuck in this feedback loop where it never stops because it doesn't know the traumatic event is over, kind of thing. And so I think that stands to show there's a lot of promise for using CRM as preventative in a healthy population, not even necessarily those that have gone through traumatic events, and restabilizing. We can strengthen the nervous system before it ever happens.
Well, that would be really helpful too, Mark, for you to, write up a little blurb for us to put on the website about your research until it gets published. I don't know how you're, I'm going to have to nudge him. Look at that.
If I could ever stop teaching 5 classes a semester.
And then I saw that Courtney Hatner raised her hand if she would like to unmute herself to ask a question. Or not.
I raised my hand, Elaine. This is Sabrina.
I wanted to know
what, and then we'll have you go next, Sabrina. Okay, go ahead, Courtney.
I was just hoping for, the conversation is great. I'm learning so much, but I'm excited to know what practices you all might recommend or suggestions you might have for furthering the integration across sectors. And by that, I mean, here I'm in Flint, Michigan. We are working on lots of different fronts trying to attack the same thing. And I see the connectivity, but I'm not as successful as I would like with crossing those sectors. With regard to the faith-based community, first responders, law enforcement, we have been able to successfully pilot Handle with Care, but it's not enough for me. So Handle with Care simply informs education sector that a child has had some contact with law enforcement. But it stops there, and that's not enough. The same way with, as you mentioned, mindfulness. So it stops there. We're doing some work with mindfulness-based stress reduction. It stops there, and I think, as has been alluded to and aforementioned, it has to be interconnected. It's not enough to recognize the trauma unless you're doing all of the things and integrating the great work that is CRM. It's not enough. So I guess I'm looking for suggestions.
Well, Courtney, this is Elaine, and I'll respond first, and then if any of our panelists want to say something. But the first thing I'd say is, like, for example, when Bill invited me to come to Syracuse. Now I am, I'm an older white woman and who does not look like she could, ever, harm anyone, I don't think. But Bill's a big kind of tough guy, he's a West Point grad. If I would have gone into the department as myself, I mean, and maybe some of you would disagree, but I don't think I would have been taken as seriously. But Bill gave me, they already knew Bill. Bill was helping them already when they had kind of like these horrible events that happened. So when Bill came in, he was already respected. So he transferred, I believe, that respect to me. And we had a fabulous time with them. And there was definitely some, I call them opportunity learners. I'm remembering one particular gentleman that I understand has come around since, but he sat in the back with his hands crossed, kind of like going, who is this woman and what in the hell does she know? Nothing.
Right.
I mean, he didn't say it, but he might as well have said it, right? That's how look at Bill's exactly. He remembers that, right? So I think that one of the things I've learned is I try to get somebody in a community that is respected within that community, and I try to get their ear. And I say,
Okay.
this is what we have to offer. I don't know if you think it, but I know if I go in there, they're probably not going to take me as seriously as if I go in with you. So if I go in with you, maybe they'll think that I have something of value. So I've always really tried to do that. It's not always easy because I'm going to say this, when we were doing our pilot project in San Bernardino County, there were 7 underserved groups that they gave us to, the state of California told us, this is who you need to go to. Well, I was trying to reach out to the African-American community, and I have to tell you, it was really hard. I went in and I did all sorts of little, appetizers to what we could do to see if anybody would come to the training. And then finally, one of my really good friends who's African-American, she goes, oh, I'm going to go to my dad's house tonight. He's having an NAACP meeting at his house. And I said, can I go? And she looked at me and she goes, Elaine, you're going to be the only white person there. I said, well, and then I said, oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to push myself. She goes, well, let me call my dad to see if it's okay. So she called her dad and he said it was okay. I know her dad. And so I went out there, and with her there, and she's on my board, we talked about what we were going to do. Then all of a sudden I get all these people who say, okay, we'll have you come and we'll do a training. You can do a training with us. But even the first day of the training, they told me there were going to be 25 people. There were only 5. And I said to one of the organizers, I said, you know what, did people get the wrong day? And she goes, oh no, Elaine, we were checking you out. We weren't going to let you talk to our community unless we felt what you were offering was in alignment to our beliefs. And this happened to be a faith-based Christian group. And one of the people in the group went home, and she looked in the Bible to see if we were congruent. And I still have the Bible verses that she sent me, because that was a real learning for me. So I'm giving you that example to say that it hasn't always been easy, but I'm like that, I'm like that ever-ready bunny that my battery never goes out. I keep trying, to do that. But I want to turn that over to our panelists.
Before you do, will you send me those verses?
I will certainly send you. I think Alina has them. Alina, can you make sure Courtney gets them? And anybody else that wants those Bible verses, maybe anybody who's on the call, Alina, can you make sure you send them out? And the person who created that list, her name is Lois Steen Herndon from San Bernardino County. So I just want to let you know. Okay.
I will make sure that goes out in the follow-up email.
Okay, great, Alina. Thank you so much. So I'm going to just ask, any one of our panelists, if you have anything to add, especially, Bill or Jen, in terms of your communities, what would be a good way to start getting people to cross-pollinate?
Well, Courtney, thank you for that question. One of the things that I found early on was really essential was to bring those people, Brad and Amy, to the CRM training, because these were experts in the area of conducting investigations of sexual assault victims, to bring them in to determine whether that was a feasible approach. And gradually we've grown that to, again, now there are 9 of us, but to have those investigators, those advocates or prosecutors, all of those people who are actually out doing the work will also be the folks that are training those others who are doing the work. That kind of discipline specific trainers, because they can speak to some of the challenges and stressors in those fields and explain how it's worked for them and how they've applied it both personally and in their particular roles. I can do that as a human being, but to have somebody they can relate to on that professional level, I think will be hugely beneficial. That's my 2 cents on the topic.
Well, I know that you guys are extremely busy, but with that being said, other than what we have, like in our Dropbox and in our emails, do any of you, particularly yourself and I think Mr. Dust, have anything that you can share as I try to, because exactly what you're talking about, Ms. Jen, is one of the big areas. Like I'm working with our local task force on trafficking. Everybody is at the table that I need to talk to, but minus the color issue that Miss Elaine was referring to, I'm a layperson talking to all these first responders. So it's still the credibility issue. It's like, you don't really know what we go through. And I don't, and I'm not professing to know. I just know that CRM would be hugely beneficial as both our nurses and law enforcement try to work with trafficking victims, as they work in terms of prosecuting cases. You can't get the information that you need from, victims for prosecution if you can't communicate with them. And
I can hear your exasperation, Courtney. I mean, that's the other thing. I don't know if any of our folks that have been trained from law enforcement would have any interest to go into Flint, Michigan. But I mean, look at what I'm saying to Jen. I mean, sometimes I think it takes someone who is from that field to talk to someone. And that also, sometimes if they can't go in person, we might be even able to invite them to come in on a Zoom and say, I'd like to have you talk to the people from the Police Commission of Washington State to see what they've done. I mean,
yes.
I don't know, Jen, I don't want to speak for you, but I mean, that's something that would be possible for any of the members of your team.
Yeah, well, there's also, every department has a peer support, as Bill and Ron have worked with in Syracuse, and those folks are generally more receptive to those concepts of well-being and resiliency. And they may not be at some of these other meetings, but because they're there to support fellow officers. But that could be a local avenue. And yeah, I'm always happy to answer questions about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And but I'm coming from a training perspective. But also connecting officers to that particular issue or area.
I think another reason that I'm so kind of antsy is we're just coming off an election. So we have a changing of the guards. We just got a new chief. We're doing some different things. As always, after, the first 100 days after an election, you have lots and lots of hope. And I guess I'm just trying to figure out if I can jump on that moving train. And then once the momentum is going, and they see, because I know that it will make a huge difference with regard to what's happening in our area. One of the other persons that's at our table is the director of our local Crime Stoppers. And it's like, if you could just, you can't get people to talk to you and give you all of the information if they're out of their zone. And if you could figure out how to help move them, I can see the possibilities. So yes, I am a little anxious, and I appreciate all of your help.
Courtney, can I make a suggestion? And maybe Alina can set this up. I'll try to see if any of our panelists, and there may be some other people from law enforcement from Syracuse as well as Bill, but also some folks from that department as well as from Washington State, that we might be able to set up just a conference call for us and talk about strategies. I think that might be something that could be helpful. So Alina, can I get you to set up that and see if anybody's amenable to have a little meeting to help further support you? And I also don't want to leave, because I know Sabrina had a comment that she wanted to make. Sabrina, do you want to chime in?
Yes, I have a question related to what you were saying, Elaine, about creating relationship, and then what Mark was saying about working with people who are healthy. And I had a situation where I really wanted to work in the interfaith community, and I approached the head of the Jewish community here in the area You know, a few weeks after the last shooting that happened in one of the synagogues in the US. And I talked to her about the program. I offered my services. I talked about how well it could support everybody. And she just couldn't bring herself to take any action or do anything. So it never went anywhere. So the Stephen Ministry Group I know because I'm part of the St. Thomas Episcopal Church. So I'm wondering, how do I make my way into the interfaith community and convince people that even though they are mostly healthy now, these can really support them. And if anything does happen in the future, they've got these great tools they can use.
Well, if there's an interfaith council, we have one in the community that I live in, and we did a one-day CRM training, and that we had people from many different congregations and many different religions, and that really started a whole conversation where people invited us to do other things. So that was one thing. But the other thing, I'd be happy to also put you in contact with, we have a new CRM teacher from Montana who is a rabbi. Her name is Francine. And Francine is a good friend of Dana Eisenberg, who's been helping out with Melissa up there. And so Francine has a vision of bringing CRM to every synagogue in the country.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
So we'll get you connected to Francine up in Whitefish, Montana.
Okay, great.
Okay, so Lena's keeping notes on this so that we'll make sure we connect everybody up. But
Okay.
I love these kind of things. I mean, these are great questions, because we can start, you know, we've had the soup and we're like excited about the soup, but come on, you have to come and drink the soup. How do we get more people to drink the soup, right?
Yes, it's good. It's really good.
It's a really good soup. If you just take a little bit of oh my goodness, it's 11:03 already. So I didn't know, Mark, if there was one more thing you wanted to say. Or not?
A warm introduction is a whole lot better than a cold call.
Ah, there you go. A warm introduction. Yes, I agree. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists and all of our listeners. These kinds of dialogues are so important for us to continue what we all believe in making a healthier world, and also hopefully a greater community where we can see the worth in all of our work and try to help those that are challenged by their trauma to see the world through a different lens. So I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for being here and being part of this, what I call the tribe, the TRIBE tribe. So thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for the work you're doing.
Thank you.